Vivek, thank you so much indeed for joining me today. It's very timely. You're here in Las Vegas for the annual Republican Jewish Coalition. Yeah. And they're one of the most important voices in the American Republican Party. You just came off stage. You made a blistering speech. There's no two ways about that. This was full-on, hardcore, pro-Israel. And it's come at a moment when many people are going the other way. The ground invasion has started, as many more thousands of Palestinians are getting killed. As other people are perhaps beginning to wobble with their support for Israel, you've hardened yours. Why?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Piers, because I've just taken criticism in the other direction as well.
So before, yeah.
Well, even from today's speech, really, the point is it's a little bit different than what anybody else is saying. On one hand, and this is the core of my message today, I support Israel's right to national self-defense. It is an absolute right, and Israel should be free to pursue whatever solution Israel wants to pursue. That is their judgment to make without us second-guessing them. On the other hand, I believe that is Israel's decision to make and Israel's mission to carry out. And the scope of the U.S. involvement in this needs to be providing diplomatic cover, a diplomatic iron dome, as I call it, for Israel to carry that out, but at the same time without military engagement. So there are voices in multiple different camps that would have criticisms of some element of what I've said. Many in the neocon movement in the United States, or the old neocon movement, would say that I should unapologetically and unabashedly support U.S. military engagement. I don't. I'm an America First conservative, but I also support Israel pursuing an Israel First agenda. And I think that if we in the United States go back to our founding ideals, I quoted George Washington's farewell speech where he warned against unnecessary foreign entanglements, but also go back to David Ben-Gurion's vision for Israel. That's really the true strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship, is when it's grounded in the self-interest of each nation, in that honesty. And so, yes, I'm a little bit different than the traditional politicians, but that's where I come out.
I want to be precise about
this.
Because as I was waiting to interview you, I was looking at your tweets today, actually, about Israel. And it just seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me you'd suddenly decided to take a much more direct and tough position. And you said this: now is the moment for Israel to return to its founding premise. The Jewish state has an absolute right to exist, a divine gift, gifted to a divine nation, charged with a divine purpose. Israel has an absolute, unequivocal right and responsibility to defend itself to the fullest, applying the only language its adversaries understand, the language of force. And what would David Ben-Gurion say? Don't depend on anyone else's fleeting sympathies or permission to do it. If Israel wants to destroy Hamas, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hamas. If Israel wants to destroy Hezbollah, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hezbollah. If Israel and Mossad want to pull off Munich 2.0 and take out every last leader of Hamas, whether they're hiding from Doha to Dresden and host a red wedding at the Four Seasons in Qatar, they should go ahead and do it. Now, when I read that, I was a bit taken aback, because your rhetoric about Israel, I would say before all this, back in the summer, was not as strident as this.
Well, this is in the wake of an attack. What I'm saying is the principle is the same. The U.S. should not be involved. But when the U.S. is not involved, I think that's better for the U.S. It's also better for Israel to be able to pursue its own national self-interest.
Here's the question I'm going to ask you. It sounds to me like your support for Israel is they can do what the hell they like.
Yes.
But you want to be president of the United States. And there are many people in America, you know this, who are extremely concerned about the proportionate scale of the Israeli response already. And it's only likely to get a lot worse before anything is resolved here. Is your support for them unconditional? Because it sounds like it is.
My support for their right to national self-existence and self-defense and carrying out whatever the heck they think is appropriate in response to the attack submitted on them? Yes, it is not our job to get involved in this in one direction or another.
But it is the American president's job, actually, to get involved in all these things, because America...
I don't think so, actually, and that's where I differ from people in both camps.
Let me rephrase it. Historically, it's been America's position in the world to be leader of the free world, to be almost the world's global policeman. And it sounds to me, if you were to become president, what you're saying is any country can, in interests of its own self-defense, can do what the hell it likes, and you won't condemn it. Is there no limit to that?
Well, look, I think that within the bounds of following international law, right, within the bounds of the legal framework that we all abide by, yes, it's not our job to be the global policeman. And I think there's a lot to what you said there, Piers, that's true. Historically, especially if you look at the last 25, 30, 40 years, that has been the role of the United States, is to try to play this role of global cop. Well, I'm running for president of the United States of America. And my job as the U.S. president is to look after American interests. That's a shift from the neoconservative view. It's a shift from the model of liberal hegemony. And I think part of this is because I come from a different generation that has seen the costs of $6.5 trillion of our national debt attributable to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that did not advance U.S. interests. Thousands upon thousands of innocent lives sacrificed in those two wars alone. Yes, I grew up into a generation where we saw that. I reject that vision. But that means we have to practice what we preach in all directions. That means this is Israel's right to defend itself. They should be unconstrained and unrestrained. The IDF can, I believe, get its own job done. For those who would call for U.S. military involvement, I say no. My view to Iran is you stay out and we stay out, and that's something that'll keep Iran out and we stay out of it as well. But that's a different view also than saying that then I'm somehow going to second guess what decisions Israel makes. No, Israel has a right to national self-defense, and we're not going to police them.
But the United States sends a lot of money to Israel every year. You, in the summer, indicated, you didn't say categorically, and I know you've been misrepresented in some of the language that people have used about what you did say, but you certainly suggested that by 2028 you'd like Israel to be autonomous from American investment.
I said it would be a good destination if we did get there. I personally think this will be better both for Israel and for the United States if that's a destination we're able to get to. Now, to be clear, from a U.S. standpoint, pragmatically speaking, I've said that we will not cut off aid to Israel, that annual aid, until Israel says they're ready for it. But actually, go back and look at Bibi's speech to Congress in 1996. He said that we have reached something like the end of our infancy, and it is time for Israel to stand on our 2 feet. That's approximately what he said in 96. Bibi's running Israel today.
But until America stops sending the money, America does have a vested interest in what Israel does.
Well, I think that's a product of prior commitments. But my view is the $16 billion.
But as we sit here.
Well, as we sit here, the $16 billion that Congress is debating now, most Republicans favor it, many Democrats favor it. I don't. I say this $106 billion aid package, forget about it. We have a $33 trillion national debt crisis in this country, a border crisis in the United States of historic proportions. My job as the U.S. president is to deal with that right here at home. And yes, I stand for Israel's right to absolutely pursue its national self-defense.
You don't want to help them?
Not militarily. Diplomatically, I do. Diplomatically, standing for their right to do it. I think the UN is a disaster.
But if you're Bibi Netanyahu, and he's coming under a lot of fire himself, but he would probably say, well, hang on, what does that mean? You're going to put this iron dome diplomatically around us?
Yes, the UN. Look at what the Secretary General of the UN said.
He would say, we've always relied on America to be there for us militarily, to be there for us financially.
Well, we are there financially. As I said, we stand by
one of our greatest allies.
Well, as you noted, I stand by our commitments. We have $3.8 billion in aid that's going to Israel. I don't propose cutting that off. We've made that 10-year commitment for a reason. But I think actually, I'm not sure that that's exactly what Bibi would say. I mean, I gave you what Bibi's address to Congress was in 1996. Let's also call out the unspoken truth here, Piers. One unspoken truth of those carrier groups going to the conflict area. Part of the reason they're there is also to play big brother to Israel, to sort of say what Israel can and can't do. So I say go back to David Ben-Gurion's founding vision for Israel. That's what I would tell Bibi.
I get that.
You do what you need to do.
Okay, but I would say to you, the reason actually those carriers have been sent in is because it is absolutely in America's national interest what happens now in this war. Because if things were to escalate, and just before I sat down with you, I saw a statement from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, extremely censorious, demanding an immediate ceasefire, saying that they think this could be a disaster for the region. You've got President Erdogan of Turkey calling Israel overtly war criminals now at a rally in Turkey. This is really escalating fast.
So I think we need to de-escalate it. And I don't think our military presence there helps that.
I'm going to come to how that may or may not transpire. But the idea that this is not relevant or pertinent to America's national interest is for the birds, isn't it?
Well, I'm not saying that it's not relevant or pertinent what's happening in the world. My question is, does our military engagement help our national interests? And that's a different question.
What about the number of little attacks we're seeing on American troops all around the region?
Proves my point. Why do we have troops in Syria? Why do we have troops in Iraq? We were told, the American public, yes, most people before this began in the last 2 weeks, they would tell you we don't even have a presence in Syria and Iraq. That's what we've been led to believe. So we have sitting targets, and now we're going to create more sitting targets. What are those sitting targets when they're hit? They're accidental tripwires. That's how major conflicts result when nobody on either side of that conflict has an interest in getting into it. So I worry when you have a loose network of even loosely affiliated renegade band groups, Islamic terrorist groups that are only not even centrally managed in any way, you cross a tripwire, and my rule of thumb for the U.S., as a commander-in-chief, I'll say it now, I'll say it again. If you hit us, we will hit you back 10 times harder. That's just a rule I'll stick to. But if they're hitting us on bases that we shouldn't have been in the first place, we're creating the opportunities for escalation into larger scale regional war that doesn't advance our interests. So I would bring them home from Syria and Iraq.
But America has kept troops at a lot of bases around that region.
I'd get them out.
Really?
Yes.
Because the whole purpose of them being there is to try and maintain some sort of order amid a lot of potential chaos.
And I think it's been unsuccessful. I mean, even if you look at right now, the fact that we have that presence, I'm going to stick specifically to Syria and Iraq, let's be precise. I don't think that that serves any strategic purpose. To the contrary, it creates sitting duck targets in moments like these that unnecessarily create tripwires for major regional conflict in the Middle East. And so nobody has given me a good answer, and I don't think nobody's given the American people a good answer, on why the heck we are still in Syria and Iraq. We shouldn't be. There's no strategic interest at issue there. It's strictly downside risk, especially in times of emotional response like this. It's a bad idea all the way down. So I stand by that principle. Now, I'm not some sort of pacifist isolationist for the sake of being an ideologue about it. No, I look at every individual region of the world, every theater, through the lens of American self-interest. And I worry, Piers, the ultimate winner in this is actually going to be China. Watching us, if we are mired in another large-scale, regional, prolonged, no-win war in the Middle East, China's the beneficiary of that. And you look at the amount of munitions we've given to Ukraine, about 1.5 million rounds of artillery. Now we're producing about 20 to 40,000 per month in the U.S., closer to 20,000. In fact, it was not that long ago that 300,000 of those rounds that we held in Israel were sent to Ukraine. So this isn't an endless cycle or a pot that runs infinitely deep. The foundation of war is economics, actually. And our economic and industrial base does not have it in it, relative to even other points in our national history, for us to be able to opt into multiple of these conflicts at the same time. As U.S. President, as the Commander-in-Chief, when it comes to war, my principle is simple. War and our involvement in it is never a preference. It would only ever be a necessity. But I worry that many of the steps that we're taking, that people here are taking, in the United States of America, are sleepwalking us into World War III at a time where we can't afford it.
The United Nations voted a motion for ceasefire in this war. The United States voted against that motion. The United Kingdom, my country, abstained. Where do you sit on that?
I think the United Nations has outlived its purpose. I really think that the statements that Secretary General Guterres made, I think on Wednesday this week, were offensive. They were senseless in nature, trying to draw a false equivalence between Israel's behaviors versus the Hamas attacks on Israel. That false equivalence is everything. You might, if I see it from a 19-year-old freshman at Harvard College, I call the kid lost and hungry in search of purpose and meaning. But to see this from the Secretary General of the UN, that's toxic. I personally think that we should have an open conversation about the U.S.'s continued involvement in the UN. I don't think that should be a foregone conclusion.
Really?
If you think about a body whose Human Rights Council is staffed by the rights of Venezuela and North Korea, it's a farce. It doesn't serve an actual coherent purpose. And so this is just Guterres' statements in the last week are just another symptom
what he said
of an institution that's outlived its purpose.
He said it's important to recognize Hamas's attacks didn't happen in a vacuum, and Palestinians have been subjected to 5 decades of suffocating occupation. Now, I agree with the criticism that it was very badly worded, because he was trying to imply that somehow the Israelis...
I mean, the timing of that versus him saying that 6 months ago is different.
I don't
two
disagree.
Different conversations.
But on the wider point he was clumsily trying to make, I think, it is indisputable that the Palestinians have been suffering repression now for many decades. It's indisputable. We go back to 1948. that hundreds of thousands of them were displaced from their homes, and that was the catalyst for everything that's followed. And you can argue, as some journalists have been doing this week, I think very powerfully, actually, Jewish journalists that I respect very highly, saying you can say that both sides have just cause historically over the land issues and everything else. But this attack on October the 7th was a completely different scale of attack. And I don't think you should look at anything else but that in terms of what is Israel's response. Yes. And the question for me, having said that, and I think you would agree with that, is what is proportionate here?
So I want to be very clear about where I stand on this as someone running for U.S. president. I'm not running for president of the UN, Secretary General of the UN, whatever it is. I'm not running for president of Israel. I'm running for president of the United States of America. And my prism, and I think that this is going to be the foundation of a future that will lead to greater peace in the United States and I think around the world, is to be very candid that my decisions will be made through one filter. What advances the interests of the United States of America? And I don't believe that it advances the United States of America for us to assume the position of a shadow ICJ, an International Court of Justice, deciding what is or isn't proportionate from our armchair position in Washington, D.C., when we have problems of our own and threats of our own to deal with. And so my view is, again, Piers, this is part of the broken foreign policy establishment in both political parties. Once you've crossed that Rubicon, then yes, you're committed to take stances on each of these questions.
Let me ask you this.
It's not my job to adjudicate this as the U.S. president. There are the injustices in this country to most of the American people.
I mean, that's a massive departure. That would be a massive departure for any American president to say it's nothing to do with us, right?
I would say that Trump took us a step in that direction, but this is a very different this is far further in that direction.
But Trump, if he was sitting here now, he wouldn't be saying this about
I can't anticipate what he would say, but I can stand for my view here, even as it relates to the UN. I think that there's an open conversation to be had about whether continued involvement in the UN serves the US's or anybody else's purpose. So NATO, I think, is a different conversation from the UN. I do think that there's a conversation first, a table stakes conversation with NATO, when you have a majority of its members still not meeting its minimum 2%
Well, they absolutely should. And that's where Donald Trump was completely right about that.
Well, I know, but against what backstop, right? So if an institution, any institution, outlives its purpose, it's worth reflecting on the continued existence of that institution. Many of these multilateral institutions, like government agencies, sometimes at home, these things should have been task forces.
But an American president has to have a moral compass too.
I do.
About whatever's going on anywhere in the world.
Well, I have a moral compass.
But particularly if they are allies that you are helping to fund. And right now, as you know,
especially treaty-bound allies, for example. Right now, there make a treaty that means something.
Okay, but my question is this. Right now, there are thousands of children. You're a father, 2 young kids. I'm a father of 4 kids. There are thousands of young children getting killed in Gaza. Innocent Palestinian kids. Half of Gaza are kids. Women being blown to pieces. Houses and whole areas being completely decimated. 1 million Gazans have had to move from the north to the south, out of their homes, which they will not be able to return to in most cases because they've been destroyed, and they're going to be destroyed. And I get that the purpose, that Israel's stated mission purpose, is to get rid of Hamas, and I agree with them. But how they do that, the whole world is watching. And the other parts of the region, including Saudi Arabia, that are on the verge of a new accord with Israel, are now recoiling at what they see as a disproportionate response.
So I disagree with some of that characterization.
My question, a long-winded question, but my question is, on a human level, with the moral compass required by an American president, do you not look at what's happening now in Gaza and slightly recoil at the scale of this and what it may become in the next days, weeks, potentially months? Do you not think,
so Piers, let me address that directly.
A responsible American president wouldn't say to Prime Minister Netanyahu, just hang on here?
So if I may, Piers, I appreciate you providing the backdrop for that question.
And I'm not giving you the answer.
No, I know you're not.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, and I take it as a question.
Yeah.
As a difficult question. It's a difficult answer. On that standard, we would have been engaging with most of the African continent for the better part of the last half century. We would be talking much more about what's going on in the last 3 years in Azerbaijan and Armenia. Somehow, interestingly, something you don't hear a peep about in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. We could go on, and each of us has different capacities. I mean, you and I share multiple things in common. We're both fathers. We've both lived the full arc of what in this country, at least, we call the American dream, right? You've been successful. I have a separate hat that I wear as a philanthropist. I look to other parts of the world, including especially the United States, where I'm able to make a difference. Not the U.S. president yet. I've been as helpful as I can, from East Palestine, Ohio, to Maui, to chartering a flight, helping pay for a chartered flight for 200 seats for Americans to get out of harm's way in Israel. That's different from the public policy hat I wear. I've been a businessman that's developed medicines to deliver medicines to patients who need them, some of them life-saving. But as U.S. president, which is the premise for our discussion here, as U.S. president, I have a moral obligation. It is to the citizens of the United States of America. And there's a philosophy underlying this. I mean, you said you and I are fathers. You caught if you're going to catch my attention, it worked. It caught me. Our obligation, I think perhaps you would agree with me, it's the way I sense it. My first obligation in the way I've lived my life to this date is to my family, to those two sons, those two boys we're raising. And then we go concentric circles to my nation. I'm a citizen of this nation, not some nebulous global citizen fighting climate change nebulously somewhere else. I'm a citizen of this nation. If I'm running to lead this nation as commander-in-chief, I do have a moral obligation. This is my moral compass speaking. My moral compass is to the United States of America. And once we have dealt with wage stagnation and a border crisis and the people who are suffering in this country, the people who are suffering for threats, vulnerable to cyber attacks, super EMP attacks, nuclear missile attacks from a Russia-China alliance that poses a great threat to the United States and our citizens today. Once we've dealt with that, then maybe we can get to hunger in the Congo after that. But that's the order we need to go in.
Yeah, but this sounds, if you don't mind me saying, this sounds incredibly isolationist.
It's not isolationist.
It's like taking Trump's worldview.
It's not isolationist, I can tell you why.
Doubling down and making it even more insular. It sounds to me like the kind of presidency you want is one where you only really care about direct impact on American citizens, which, by the way...
I do. That much I'm guilty of. That much I will admit.
I get it.
Direct impact on American citizens.
But I don't think the number one superpower in the world can just ignore a moral compass elsewhere in the world, particularly in countries which are your allies.
So I'm not...
I mean, I come from the United Kingdom, for example. If we had
I'm not saying ignore
If we had an attack like this, would you have the same philosophy to us? I mean...
It's a treaty-bound ally, right? So I think treaties mean something. And this is where I think...
But where is your moral line with what's happening in Israel right now?
Let's work backwards here from an outcome we both want to avoid, World War III.
Right.
How did World War I, the Archduke Ferdinand's death, escalate into a massive war that killed millions around the world, only to lay the groundwork for then World War II, which killed millions more? They're accidental tripwires that people cross that then create escalation that nobody imagined and yet, in retrospect, becomes a conflagration. I think we lose that clarity when we're vague, saying there's selectively certain. And admittedly,
no, but
you're picking one.
It's your certainty that I have a problem with.
No, but you're picking certain conflicts or certain areas of humanitarian crises while outright ignoring others.
No, I get it, but
and so I say, look at it through the prism. If I do one quick thought just to finish this, because I think you can then at least understand the view, even if you disagree. I'm not saying don't get involved or not. I'm saying the question of whether or not we get involved is decided through one prism, of whether it advances the American interest. And so there may be certain cases in which we do make the determination that does advance the American interest. I'll give you one right now. Taiwan. If China were to invade Taiwan right now, I think it is the job of the U.S. to affirmatively defend. Why? Because we depend on Taiwan for semiconductors that power our modern way of life.
So you would, if you were president, you'd send troops in to defend Taiwan?
I would defend Taiwan, and I'm not going to telegraph exactly which means. There are many means to do it.
Because you haven't said that before.
I've said that before. Actually, I mean, people don't listen, but I've said that before.
You've changed your position on that.
No, I've actually been crystal clear on this at every step of the way. Now, what I've also said, where you might be getting that, is politics thing is interesting. I don't fault you for it because that's what's in the ether. I've said that very clearly. We will defend Taiwan at least until we get semiconductor independence in the United States, at which point we will resume our current posture of strategic ambiguity.
Why would you defend Taiwan militarily but not Israel?
Well, I think that right now we depend on those little semiconductors for our modern way of life.
Just purely
and
financial.
Israel also doesn't need it.
But Israel provides a lot of stuff to America.
Well, here's my point. And this is the whole point, Piers, is it's not some top-down cookie-cutter analogizing. I analyze each situation independently.
Isn't there a core principle?
Israel is able to defend itself right now. And I think Israel will be better able to defend itself if we don't muddy the waters. Taiwan has no chance of defending itself versus China, and it matters to the U.S.
Your red line you said to me was
American interest.
It was if American citizens got attacked.
We will hit you back 10 times harder.
Okay, but American citizens were attacked.
So that's what makes this conflict difficult. Is Israel able to take care of that job? if American targets are hit as American targets, right? Let's say they know they're hitting us on an American base, that's a direct hit on the United States.
But if Americans get killed in Israel,
well, if Americans
or
get
get
Israel,
kidnapped and taken hostage by Hamas,
we need to. Well, right now,
you don't see any
I would
imperative.
prioritize getting those American hostages out. That is a top priority for me.
Militarily?
It is a top priority for me.
American military?
Now, right now, let's be tethered to the facts as they exist. They've been releasing hostages two at a time. There's reports yesterday of Hamas willing to do a deal for American hostages to get released.
But that deal apparently collapsed, which is why the Israelis have started the ground war.
So if I'm Commander-in-Chief, my top focus, and there's a lot of levers here, but you prioritize what matters. Getting American hostages home, top priority.
So you would send
getting sons and daughters.
So just to clarify, you would send American troops in to get the hostages.
I would not take an option off the table in a limited way to protect Americans.
Right. But you said
to protect Americans. And America First includes all Americans.
But you did say earlier that you would not want to send any American military into this situation.
I don't want U.S. military involvement in somebody else's war.
You just said that you'd send troops in to get the hostages.
American hostages.
Only the American hostages.
Special forces targeted, but Piers, you're paying attention to the negotiations, I trust. There are very clear delineations that Hamas has drawn right now for releasing civilian hostages of other nations.
But just to clarify, clarify, Vivek, for this, I mean, you're not seriously suggesting that you would send in American troops down to get hostages.
Special forces or otherwise, or negotiators.
But literally only get American hostages rather than, say, Israeli hostages.
The only condition under which we will have shown up there was because they hold American hostages.
Right, but
if we're there, we're going to do the best deal we can to advance American interests, which includes releasing Israeli hostages.
But I would say there's inconsistency to what you've now been saying about this, because you started by saying we should have no military involvement in this whatsoever.
What I have said, Piers, at every step, I'll bring you back the North Star. What advances the American interest? Right. That will be my prism. That's different in different situations. But the question is, what advances the American interest? And to me, the America First agenda includes all Americans. I did my part. As I said, I personally paid for a charter flight with 200 seats to get people out of harm's way. I've told you, the bases in Syria and Iraq, if I'm Commander-in-Chief, I want to bring those sons and daughters home. And yes, it would be a top priority. If you're Commander-in-Chief, you're making decisions holistically. But it is a top priority to bring our hostages home.
Given our American hostages being held by Hamas,
yes,
then it sounds to me by your criteria that you've set out today in this interview, that by that criteria, as American president, you would send American troops in.
The only reason I criticize that question, Piers, is that there are many other ways short of that we can get those hostages home now. It is literally happening as we speak and are having this conversation. So that is a straw man relative to the status quo of deal discussion with hostages actually being released and brought home. And if you're U.S. president, you're not making each decision in isolation.
What would your moral
You set certain priorities, and a top priority for me is American hostages.
What is your moral compass, though? If you were to witness Israel, for example, if this escalates, and Israel, which is believed to be a nuclear power, they don't admit it, but they're believed to have nuclear weapons.
Probably is. Israel is almost certainly a nuclear power.
If they were to suddenly use a nuclear weapon, would that cross a red line for you?
So my view is this. What advances the American interest? I don't mean to sound like a broken record. Those circumstances.
You are sounding like a broken record.
Well, but I wanted to offer clarity at a moment where I risked maybe sounding ambiguous to you. The real answer is each of those situations has to be looked at through the prism of what caused that to happen.
My overarching question was, is there a limit to what you would accept Israel doing as President of the United States? Is there a red line?
Full accordance with international law and the laws of war.
Do you think at the moment they are acting in accordance with international law and the Geneva Convention? Because many think they're breaking.
I believe there's no evidence to suggest that they're outside of that in the context of the laws of just engagement, in the context of what Hamas did to Israel.
I mean, I absolutely think they have a right to defend themselves after what happened. I think they're right to try and get rid of Hamas. I've got to say, when I am looking at my social media feed at the moment, and I'm seeing a constant bombardment, quite literally, of these terrible scenes out of Gaza with screaming kids and women who've been slain and so on, and whole areas just completely leveled. I'm looking at this and getting increasingly concerned about the proportionality of what is happening, and also in the understanding that clearly it's going to get a lot worse. And if I'm the American president, Joe Biden has already said he's very concerned about this, right? It seems to me what you're trying to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but that Israel can do what it wants, that after that attack, There is no limit. As far as you're concerned, sitting in the White House, there is no limit. And a lot of people will hear that.
Piers, let me just challenge one premise here.
Finish your question. A lot of people will hear this, particularly Americans, American Arabs will hear this, and they'll think, what, there's no limit? The American president has no moral line that Israel can cross in their desire to get rid of Hamas.
So I think there's one troubling premise baked in there, which is that the U.S. is the only nation that can have a moral compass. I mean, you're presuming that is what's baked into that question. Let's smoke that out.
I think every country should have one.
But what's baked into your question?
I didn't like my country, honestly.
What's baked into your question?
I didn't like my country abstaining on the issue of a ceasefire. Have a view. I always think abstention.
I also say have a view. You and I share that in common. Abstention is lame.
Is a lame.
It's a particularly lame response.
It's quite cowardly, actually.
Abstention is a lame response. Have a view and defend it. If you're going to be at the table of a body like the UN, if it should exist in the first place. But what's baked into the premise of your question is that Israel has no moral compass, and therefore it's the U.S.'s job to have one.
I'm not saying that.
Well, but it's baked into the premise of your question that Israel's doing something and the U.S. has a moral compass to decide.
As you know, there are a lot of people around the world. Millions, hundreds of millions, right? Especially in the Muslim world, but not just the Muslim world.
And why are we picking on this humanitarian catastrophe or alleged humanitarian catastrophe, but not countless others in other parts of the world over the course of the last 20 years?
I think that
leads to a slippery slope, which is impossible
hypocrisies.
for the U.S. to actually manage. And so we come back to what are the relations between nations. The job of each nation is to look after its national self-interest.
Is it fair that Israel is able to turn on, for example, power and water and turn it off for the whole of Gaza?
It wasn't fair that Hamas came from Gaza into Israel on hang gliders to kill innocent civilians.
But as the UN boss clumsily put it, this is not a new conflict. This has been going on for a long time.
Is it fair that the Arab people, the descendants of Ishmael, have 20-some-odd countries, yet none of them will take on the Palestinians, even as they nominally stand for them against the fight on the Jewish state? So I think these are questions that we should elevate in our capacity as citizens and as leaders, diplomatically. And I think this may, hearing you, Piers, this may be actually, we might have a lot more common ground than the last 10 minutes might suggest. There's a role for diplomacy.
I mean, I'm not as certain in my views as you seem to be.
Well, there's a role for diplomacy here. So is the role for the U.S. to engage diplomatically? Yes, around the world. I think the U.S.'s accomplishment, one of the U.S. accomplishments under the Trump administration that I respect was the Abraham Accords. That was a diplomatic achievement, not a military achievement. And I think we should take those diplomatic achievements to the next level. And so if I'm to level set our conversation, we might have risked talking past each other a little bit. It's not that I want to be an ideologue and just say that we're going to be completely callous and have no view on it. We have a view, but what I'm going to do about it is going to be determined by the American self-interest.
One thing you've said today.
And so diplomatic engagement, and even that diplomatic engagement would be through the American self-interest, but having that conversation
you talk about
is something that good leaders can do.
Okay, you talk about diplomacy. Was it diplomatic of you, I think you repeated it again in your speech today, to say that if it was left to you, you'd see Israel putting up the heads of the top 100.
Not that if it's left to me. If it's left to Israel and that's what they decide to do, I'm perfectly okay with that.
This is your idea.
Yeah.
Was that they put the heads on stakes of the 100 top Hamas leaders. That's not diplomacy, is it? And that's going to be literally pouring a bucket of fuel onto a raging fire.
I actually think that might be far better, Piers, as an alternative to a prolonged ground invasion with Gaza involving a bunch of civilians versus taking the top 100 leaders of a terrorist organization that are carrying out a form of genocide.
Isn't that the kind of medieval barbarism which they perpetrated on the people of Israel on October the 7th, which
I think there's one crucial difference.
The civilized world should seek to be above,
Piers, there's a real difference there, a fundamental difference. One is an armed militia doing it against civilians versus going after the perpetrators, and I specifically said the top 100 leaders of Hamas. And this is a fun conversation. It's interesting to me because I've actually just taken objections the other way, saying that that's far too limited in scope, right? Just to say the top 100 leaders of Hamas. Well, why wouldn't we expand the scope of who we hold responsible? So yes, I do think that's diplomacy.
But Barack Obama never showed images of a dead Osama bin Laden. He didn't feel that would be the right thing to do. He felt that would be too inflammatory, is my understanding.
Well, I'll say two things in response to that. That's Barack Obama is not my arbiter of what counts as good diplomacy or not. And second is each situation is different. I mean, each situation is different about asking what is in the American self-interest. So I'm not saying, on the Israel point, I was very clear in my speech when I brought this up, that is, I said it about 3 times, that is Israel's decision to make, not ours. And I think that provides a level of, yes, moral clarity about who the leader of a nation owes an obligation to. David Ben-Gurion had a vision for Israel. Self-sufficiency, makes its own decisions for its own security. George Washington, in his farewell address in the United States of America, had a vision for this nation, the lead founding father of our nation, that we look to the interests of our citizens without foreign entanglements. And I think if we're honest about that, I actually think that that opens up greater possibility for peace everywhere, because both our allies and our adversaries can actually trust what we say. Red lines will actually be red lines, because if they're crossed, it means it really violates the national self-interest. That's the way I look at it.
One of the other candidates for President, Ron DeSantis, has said that the students who've been protesting across American campuses, very pro-Palestinian, a lot of Jewish students feeling very threatened by it, some of these students actually beaming pro-Hamas imagery to the buildings at George Washington University and so on, that they should be taken out. If they have visas, they should be revoked and so on. You've said you don't believe in that because of free speech. But again, is there no limit to that free speech? If people are actively supporting and promoting a terror organization like Hamas, isn't that hate speech, not free speech?
Well, to be clear, I am an ardent defender of the First Amendment.
So I agree with you.
So the First Amendment does not protect against actual incitement to violence, to say, hey, go kill that guy right there, do it now, shoot him. That's not protected speech.
What about saying Hamas is right?
So in the U.S., the jurisprudence on this, the U.S. is very clear. Anything that is an expression of an opinion is protected. So if you're expressing an opinion, however heinous, that opinion is protected by the First Amendment. All opinions are protected. Now, my view is some of those are heinous opinions. We're the country, the United States of America, who said the Nazis could march in Skokie, Illinois. Many people around the world would disagree with that, but that's what makes America itself. I disagree vehemently with those Nazis, but I will defend to the death in this country, the right of anybody to express their opinion.
You'll defend to the death the right of people to be Nazis in America?
The right of people to express an opinion. Being a Nazi can involve more than that, right? If you're taking action based on that, no. Heck no. But if you want to...
But if you're promoting and supporting a Nazi ideology, why would you want to accept that in America?
I don't want to accept that. The way we defeat it...
Why would you tolerate it?
I don't tolerate it. We don't tolerate it through more speech. You defeat it in the marketplace of ideas, and we're not tolerating it. Because think about what you're doing to somebody who has that nasty opinion and then tell them that they have to keep it to themselves. You tell people they can't speak, they scream.
But would you allow people
If you tell people they can't scream, that's when they take physical action. So I don't want to see that.
Would you be happy to see pro-Nazi
No, I'm not
marches?
happy. Of course I'm not happy.
If you're President of the United States, you would allow it to happen. Nazi marches.
I'll tell you something deeper, Piers. This is how it works in the United States. It's not even my power to decide whether to allow it to happen. The Constitution and the Supreme Court has already long held that the expression of heinous opinions is part of the American constitutional life. To say that the government, no government actor, should ever decide which opinions can and cannot be expressed, period. That's what the First Amendment is all about. Once we lose that, once the government can decide which ideas can and cannot be expressed, that's the ballgame. And I've been the major defender of this from a right-wing perspective for years, right? Saying that conservatives should be allowed to express skepticism of COVID vaccines or the origin of the COVID pandemic or questions relating to race or questions relating to asking government questions.
You said you wouldn't have your vaccines again if you had your time.
As a side note, that's true, yeah.
Why?
I'm a young, healthy man, and I think that we have risks of myocarditis that are revealed now that weren't revealed then. The only reason I took it was a matter of convenience. We couldn't travel.
You do accept, I presume, that many millions of people had their lives saved by the vaccines.
I think by vaccines other than COVID-19, sure. I think the COVID-19 vaccines, I think that there's a deeper debate to be had about the cost and benefit.
You don't think they saved millions of lives?
Well, I think the costs exceeding the benefits are really a case-by-case discussion.
What's the cost of a human life?
The question is how many human lives were lost also as a consequence of myocarditis or other risks that are yet untested.
An absolutely tiny number.
So this is an area that strikes near and dear to my heart.
I've studied the myocarditis thing extremely thoroughly.
Including in young men and what the cost-benefit analysis is.
Well, because actually I've got 3 sons in their 20s, and at least one of them thought he may have had myocarditis. So I studied it.
So it's personal to you.
Yeah.
I developed 5 medicines which are FDA approved today. The ultimate hypocrisy at the heart of our regulatory regime, Piers says, on one hand, and I'm an absolutist in both directions here, on one hand, this FDA in the US that says you can't even try a medicine or a vaccine unless it's been through 10 years of testing, you don't have the right to try it. I reject that. I'm a right to try absolutist. I think you should be able to make an informed decision for yourself of whether you want to take that risk or not. But part of being a right to try absolutist is I'm a right not to try absolutist too. Just because the FDA has pushed it through, nobody should be mandated to take it.
But you're not suggesting,
So
just to be clear, you're not suggesting that more people died of myocarditis
No, I'm not.
as a result of taking vaccines than the number of people whose lives were saved.
I'm not making an empirical claim. I'm making a normative claim that everybody should be able to decide for themselves.
Because it was a tiny number of people who died from myocarditis, and every vaccine has people who have reactions. I'm not diminishing.
I think that they were. I think they were decidedly higher in this case.
I'm not diminishing it was a problem, nor am I saying that with hindsight, clearly younger people were not as affected by COVID as older people. We now know that as a fact.
So my philosophy as a policymaker is medical choice absolute in both directions. Medical choice to try what hasn't been approved. You should have the right to make that informed decision. And just because it has been approved, under no condition should it be mandated. That's the policy-making matter.
Let me read you a quote from Nikki Haley, one of your other rivals to be president. She says, you want to go and defund Israel, you want to give Taiwan to China, you want to go and give Ukraine to Russia. Under your watch, you will make America less safe. Now, we've discussed Israel. You've clarified your position on Taiwan. And I think it's significant that you now said you would send in American troops to defend Taiwan should China try and attack it.
I said we would militarily defend.
You'd send troops in.
It depends on whether ground troops are actually what matter or not. You could talk about destroyers. You could talk about SSGNs.
But you would send American military in to defend the Taiwanese.
We would militarily defend Taiwan, yes, at least until we've achieved semiconductor independence.
I mean, that wasn't.
And I'm the only candidate who said it.
But it wasn't what you used to say.
Piers, that's false. I
Is
have
it
said
false?
that. Yeah, it is false. You can check this for yourself. I have always said the part that these people are picking at is the fact that I said at least until Taiwan gained semiconductor independence. So you look at my earliest statements on this, all the way back to the Nixon Library.
Okay, so here is where I'm curious again.
At least until semiconductor independence is the part that these people trip up on.
All right, so here's where I'm curious again. So if Taiwan gets attacked and invaded by an authoritarian regime like China, you wouldn't hesitate to have American military defend them.
And you know why?
But no, you've explained why.
Yeah, because we depend on them for our modern way of life, that island.
Business, okay. So,
well, not business. It's our modern way of life. These lights wouldn't work right now, and our phones wouldn't work.
But this brings me neatly to Ukraine,
yes,
which was invaded and attacked. It's a sovereign democratic country. It was attacked.
Democratic with an asterisk.
No, democratic.
With an asterisk.
Well, it had a massive majority voted for democracy.
Well, much of the regions that are occupied haven't been represented in Ukraine's parliament for 9 years.
Right.
So, table stakes discussion there.
But it is, okay, you can call it asterisk democracy. I'll say democracy. But it was attacked and invaded by Russia. And you originally, when you first tweeted about it, you were quite censorious about what Russia had done and pro-Ukraine. Your rhetoric changed.
I wasn't pro-Ukraine, but I found it offensive. I mean, I've said this at every step. Putin is a craven dictator. Okay, Putin is absolutely a craven dictator.
Is he a war criminal?
I don't know. I don't have enough information to suggest he's a war criminal. The ICJ makes that judgment. Again, the U.S. president.
You don't think what he's done in Ukraine constitutes a war crime?
Based on what we've seen, a lot of it looks likely to meet the ICJ's test, but I don't think the U.S. president...
It meets any test,
Well, I think that a lot of people have committed war crimes then, on that basis, right? So you can't just selectively single him out.
Well, illegally invading a sovereign country is a crime, isn't it?
For us to get on the same page, is Putin an evil dictator? Yes, he is. Just because Putin is bad, does that mean Ukraine is good? No, it does not. Okay, this is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. This is a country that has consolidated all of its media into one state TV media arm. This is a country that celebrated a Nazi in its own ranks in front of the Canadian Parliament, Zelensky did. This is a country that's effectively threatening the U.S. not to hold its elections unless the U.S. forks over more money. And also against the backdrop, Piers, it's worth wondering why that initial incursion to Kyiv went nowhere, but Luhansk and Donetsk were easily captured without counter-resistance. Why? These are Russian-speaking regions. Many residents there don't even view themselves as part of Ukraine. They view themselves as part of Russia. And for the better part of the last decade, almost 10 years, they haven't even been represented in the Ukrainian parliament.
Well, there are large
so we have to measure that against the facts
swathes of United
what we're
States English-speaking. Should we have it back?
What's that?
Large parts of America are English-speaking. Should we have that back?
Well, all of them
your
have
criteria?
all of them have been represented in the
Come
U.S.
and get
government.
revenge for George III's incompetence? And
everyone-
say, well, hang on, you're all speaking English.
Every one of them
So
gets.
actually, we're having it all
Piers,
back.
Piers, I
thanks.
think you're purposely.
In which case, you may not
you're
be president.
purposely avoiding the
You may not be
hilarious
president.
part about that.
I might be King
might be
Piers
king.
of
I
the
know,
United States of America.
It's the dream of many Englishmen, perhaps, but that's okay. It's
You
not
get
going to
my
happen.
point.
No, I don't get your point, because the whole point is they weren't represented in Ukraine's government. Okay, and the United States national identity is different than the cultural identity of the people in the Donbass.
Ideologically, what's the
there
difference
were-
between
I'll tell you
between
what, if
racing
I'll tell you what.
American military to defend Taiwan, but in your case, wanting to stop funding American military support for Ukraine right at the moment when many would say it's never been more important?
Because my basis for preventing China from invading Taiwan right now was not that Taiwan is a democracy.
No,
My basis for doing
wanted
it
their money.
is that there's American self-interest at issue. Our modern way
What
of
about
life.
all the foodstuffs that come out of Ukraine?
Our food we can be self-sufficient in this country. The foodstuffs that come from Ukraine to the United States is not going to affect our modern way of life. I mean, that's the hard answer.
So for you,
And
it's a pure financial
we're not
calculation.
It's not just financial.
It's not a
It's
moral one.
self-interest. It's not a moral calculation of whether the U.S.
Self-interested or selfish?
It's American-centric. And I think it was actually selfish for the leaders of the United States to indulge their moral vanities while leaving Americans holding the bag here at home. And here's the other thing, Piers. We're not having this conversation in a vacuum. Look at this. How well has this gone? Forking over nearly $200 billion direct and in kind.
I think it's gone incredibly
value.
well. I'll tell you why.
I think it's gone. Let me
explain
disastrously.
Why. Let me explain why. Everybody assumed that Putin would run over Kyiv, take control.
That was a wrong assumption.
Kick out. Rest
because there was a Ukrainian counterinsurgency
because Ukrainians fought for their democratic rights.
And why didn't they fight in the Donbass?
Freedom. And I remember a time when America used to celebrate.
But Piers, you're missing one super important detail here. You actually made the point that I would like to make, which is the reason why Russia has succeeded in the parts of the Donbass they're occupying is that the people there have more of an affinity for Russia than they do to Ukraine. So you can't say democracy sometimes, but not others. These people don't want to be part of Ukraine.
It isn't actually true, because most of the polls...
Many of them don't
the
want to
polls
be.
show that the people in those regions still want to be part of Ukraine.
Many of them don't, and that's why there was no counterinsurgency.
Some don't. I was told it was like 10 to 15%.
They haven't been represented in Luhansk and Donetsk.
It's a small percentage.
They have not even been represented in the Ukrainian parliament.
Would you really, if you won the presidency in 2024?
I would do a deal that ends this
What's
war.
your deal? I mean, you and
Here's
Donald
the deal.
Trump talk about, we're going to sort it
Well,
all
I'll
out
give you
tomorrow.
detail. In my case, I'll give you details.
You would give Putin what he's taken, right?
I won't give him anything. There's a deal.
What would you give him?
I wouldn't give him anything. I would give him a deal.
What's the deal he's going to take then?
Well, here's the deal. He has to exit his military alliance with Xi Jinping. End the Russia-China military alliance. That's the top threat that the U.S.
What's
faces.
the deal with Ukraine
And then
territory?
in return, what we get is a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. In truth, that's just keeping.
But what about the land he's taking?
Well, this is the most important part. Is the NATO hard? This is what matters most to Putin. There's other parts of this deal I can talk about on both sides. The most important element of each, and then I can go to the second most. The most important element is Russia exit its military alliance with China. We make a hard commitment that NATO not admit Ukraine to NATO. Which, by the way, Piers, that violates. We've systematically violated a commitment we made back in 1990. James Baker, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a commitment to Gorbachev.
Tell me on this deal.
And then here we'd freeze the current lines of control.
What?
Freeze the current lines of control.
You would give Putin everything
I wouldn't
he's
give him
stolen?
anything. I would freeze the current lines of control.
What do you mean? What does that mean?
These are Russian-speaking regions that are occupied today.
You would literally give Putin what he's stolen.
You
would give a guy.
I'm not giving him anything. I'm giving him a deal.
What did you describe him as to me again?
It's conditioned.
What did you call Putin?
He's an evil dictator.
You give an
so
evil
is Xi Jinping.
dictator
So are countless others.
land he's stolen by killing people. You would give him the land.
Pierce, I'm not going to give him anything. I'm giving him a deal.
You've just said you give him the whole.
I'm not going to give him. That's your word, not mine. I give him a deal. What I would do is, we would require Russia to exit its military alliance with China. What threatens the United States of America?
What message are you
the
sending?
Russian-China military
Vivek,
alliance.
You're president of the United States, and you say, all right, Vladimir, I know you invaded illegally a sovereign democratic country, and they fought for
It's not a democratic country.
And they fought
Ukraine is not a democratic country.
And they fought for
Ukraine is not a democratic country.
I don't agree with you.
I mean,
I don't agree with
look
you.
at what they're doing to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church right now.
Let me finish
this.
It's
just a myth.
Let me finish.
But we're having a mythological conversation.
Well,
Ukraine is not a democratic country.
The people of Ukraine voted for democracy in massive majority.
Except for the ones that didn't vote that happened to be in the regions occupied by Russia.
But you would give this area that they've stolen back to the Russians, right? So you're
I would not.
You're telling
it would be conditioned.
You're telling every.
I would not do anything other than we get what we want in return.
You're telling every evil dictator in the world, you can go and invade any country you like, take whatever land you can in a bloody war for as long as
Here's
you like.
what I find fascinating.
And then eventually, I'll just give it to you.
How many hours of your show, or minutes, or seconds, have you dedicated to what Azerbaijan has done to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh on the different region on the other side of Caspian? Zero is probably the answer, just like every other major member of the media. Why? Because Ukraine has been as successful in selling this Pied Piper myth in the United States as Azerbaijan has. Yet what Azerbaijan just did in Nagorno-Karabakh over the same region, dating back to even September of this year, pin drop silence. So if you're going to apply that standard, you would be applying it far more broadly.
But applying your standard as President of the United States seems
my standard is stay out of them all. Because if you're in Ukraine for that reason, the United States would be in 10 other conflicts right now. And so you're selectively applying it, if I may say, Piers, not even to the best example you could make, because Ukraine is not a paragon of democracy.
Churchill's quote about crocodiles and appeasers, right?
Well, that's applied selectively, analogizing some element of history as opposed to analyzing what the individual situation is. And so where is Azerbaijan, Armenia? Why is that not part of the conversation? Just because the media has decided that that isn't what we're going to pay attention to, because it's not what the cool kids are talking about, likely because it's Christians at stake. Let's be honest about that. So this is a country in Ukraine that's gone after the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. This is a country where the regions of Russia that have been occupied, several of those provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk in particular, not even represented in the Ukrainian parliament. So the idea that this is some battle of good versus evil is a farce. And even if you're going to pick good versus evil, there's a lot other better examples to pick. And I'm principled to say that we should not be making those moral judgments for other people when my moral obligation is to the people of the United States of America.
But you have just made a moral judgment. You've actually said to an evil dictator, you can come and grab that land and keep it.
No, that presumes that it was our job.
It's a moral judgment.
It presumes that it was our job to be able to say yes or no in the first place. That is not the job of the United States of America. The job of the United States of America is to be strong and look after its own citizens.
It used to be.
We have a different view.
It used to be.
Maybe from an looking from an outsider's perspective in, it might look that way.
Call me old-fashioned, but I remember in World War II when the Americans came in to help Britain finish off
when
the
Pearl
Nazis.
Harbor was hit.
Yes.
So I mean, the hard answer is
better late than never would be my response to that.
Well, America should look after its self-interest.
When America was attacked itself, then America did come into the war and did help Britain win it.
That's correct. When America was hit, that happened.
And thank God they did.
And I'm grateful that America and Europe should be grateful that we did. And now NATO can spend maybe 2% of its GDP on military spending, which it's still failing to do. So much for gratitude. So I would say
on that point, I agree with you, and I agree with Donald Trump. And he did the right thing. When he said NATO was obsolete, he meant the way the finances are not being paid by a lot of the member countries.
They're just not. A majority of them are.
And they should be. Let's turn to conspiracy theories. People think you're a conspiracy theorist. Are you?
No, I'm a conspiracy realist. I believe in actually some of the most mundane so-called conspiracies have been obvious realities hiding in plain sight.
Do you think
people said it was a conspiracy theory, by the way, when I said that like many others, the COVID pandemic originated in a lab in Wuhan, back when we were supposed to buy this wet market.
And it's most likely it did.
And most likely that it did. So I think that history has taught us that many of things that we reject.
Do you believe
I'm guided by fact.
Do you believe the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax?
No.
Do you think the parents of those kids who died were actors?
No.
Okay, so why did you appear on Alex Jones's show?
Those are two very different questions,
They're not.
Piers.
Because he's
Those are two fundamentally different questions.
Well, they're not, because
in fact,
this is a guy who's propagated.
I invited him on my podcast, and in that particular instance, I gave him an opportunity to say what people should listen to. This is actually what respects everybody. What did he say? He said he was wrong. That's what he said. He came on, we sat in a conversation just like this one. He said he was wrong and he regretted it. And so I think that this culture of creating...
Why would you invite someone like that onto your podcast?
Give me some examples of people you've...
Have you ever talked... Isn't it called Truth?
Have you ever talked...
What's your podcast called?
Truth.
Truth.
And the path to truth runs through free speech and open debate.
So you have the worst liar in America, a man who calls...
See, I don't believe in creating obstacles to who speaks to who.
Let me finish my character assessment of Alex Jones, right?
I didn't make a character assessment.
I'm about to make one of him, right? Because as you know, he was found guilty in October 2022 of defaming the families of the Sandy Hook victims after years monetizing the lie that it was a hoax and the families of the dead were actors. He's been ordered to pay a collective $1.5 billion to the people who he so sickeningly defamed. And yet there's you, a guy who wants to be president of the United States, inviting this guy.
Saying that was dead wrong. It was dead wrong. Now, my view, though, Piers, is, and the whole premise of the podcast, all the people I've talked to
Chris Christie said when he heard you did that, He said,
I could care less what Chris Christie has to
but
say.
he said
should get the
that
hell
to
out of
him
this race
was
and save
disqualifying
everybody the time.
on its own.
Well, I think it's disqualifying to anybody who believes that we have to preordain who we do and don't talk to.
You give platforms to just blatant conspiracy theorists to come on and talk about the truth.
I think that part of the reason is what's a conspiracy theory yesterday is a truth tomorrow.
Did you challenge him about Sandy Hook?
I did, and I told you what he said, actually. As far as I know, it's the first time I've heard it said. I think it was useful. He said it was wrong. He regretted it. He made a mistake. Human beings have made
It's
mistakes.
not the first time he said it. He said it to me.
Well, good. So what? You platformed him?
Yeah.
Well, interesting, Piers.
I platformed
Why
him
would you do that?
Because I spent the entire interview going after him about his wicked lies.
Piers,
and
my
I
view
also
is
had a
open
mother
debate.
of one of the victims on, because I was on air at CNN.
Open debate is good.
When
and I
that
like you for that
atrocity
reason.
happened.
I like you for that reason. But I think the American way is not to decide there's certain pariahs and people we don't talk to. Far left, far right. I mean, look, I went on the Young Turks podcast, something that a Republican presidential candidate doesn't do either. I practice what I preach. When a protester shows up to I was in Iowa, crazy protester just barges in the back of the event. Security's taking her out. I said, bring her back, we'll give her the microphone. That's just how I roll. I believe it's the founding spirit of the United States of America that all ideas get expressed, and the way we defeat bad ideas is through free speech and open debate. And so, unlike others, Piers, I practice what I preach with my own action.
You've got to have some limits.
I disagree with that.
Well, then,
with respect to the expression of opinions, violence is a limit, right? I mean, I don't stand for violence of any form,
but
direct
Alex
or
Jones's
indirect.
lies did inspire people to commit acts of violence against these families. People turned up and threatened them. That's an act of violence.
So
he literally
the expression of a heinous
violence with his lies.
The expression of a heinous opinion is different than not, and it was taken to the court system. We have,
Right.
I mean, the court systems have handled this. That's different from saying that somebody should not be talked to by a fellow American. I just don't think that's the American way.
Let me talk to you about guns generally, because there was another horrible mass shooting in America in the last few days. 18 people killed. I saw your tweet response, and it was a very conventional Republican response to mass shootings, of which there are now so many you can almost hardly get over the one before there's another one. And it was all about mental health and this and this. And the one thing you didn't...
I mean, it's a really important
I
topic.
know.
It's not like a mental health. I mean, this is a real fundamental topic in the
Many
United
other
States.
countries have mental health problems just at the same level that America does. The difference about America, almost exclusively of anywhere in the world, is that America has 400 million plus firearms in circulation. So when people are mentally unstable or sick, they have easy access to guns. And you didn't mention the word gun in your statement. And I was curious, why not? Do you not think that guns play a part in gun massacres?
Well, obviously, guns, definitionally, per your question, somewhat tautological there, guns play a role in guns massacres. They don't play a role in massacres of other kinds.
Do you think guns kill people?
I think people kill people using guns and using other instruments to do it.
Have you ever known someone,
I can give you my policy perspective if you're
someone,
interested in that.
Let me ask you, have you ever known someone shoot someone
We'll let you indulge with whatever the interesting,
right.
clever framing you have.
Let me get the
up,
question
so.
right.
Yeah.
Have you ever known,
do the clever flavor?
Have you ever known a human being shoot somebody dead without a gun?
I know whatever the setup is. I'll give you whatever I lost track of it.
Setup.
But whatever the premise is.
That's the question.
Guns have been. People have pulled the trigger of guns that have killed people. I think let's just get that on the table.
Yeah.
Sure. Tautological, but
you don't think the answer
that's not a useful policy question.
I'm curious. Look, as a British citizen who has a home in America, I can go and get a semi-automatic rifle very easily tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'm not even an American citizen. I just have to apply for a hunting license, give my American address, and I'll get access to any firearms I want. I can kit myself up like Rambo, right? Legally. What I can't do in America is buy a Kinder Surprise chocolate egg. They're banned on safety grounds.
Well, I think that makes no sense.
You're a very bright man.
I'm a medical and food choice absolutist.
Can you explain to me why it's deemed more dangerous that I should have a chocolate egg with a little toy inside it that might choke people compared to an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle that could slaughter a lot of people in a very short period of time?
So I'm a pro-freedom person, and so I'm not going to sit here and defend some other foolish restriction that the United States has on a million things that I'm generally against. But I can speak to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not about a technocratic judgment about maximizing or minimizing the number of people who were killed. The Second Amendment is about something else altogether. It's analogous to the discussion we just had about free speech. It's a different value judgment. Are there risks to allowing free speech? Yes, there are, but we bear those risks because that's who we are. That we trade that risk off to say that's how we preserve freedom when it comes to the First Amendment. The Second Amendment makes a similar value judgment. The purpose of the Second Amendment actually wasn't to allow people to have the freedom to hunt. That's not what it's about. It was about repelling and keeping a foreign, in that case, started British monarchy at bay. It's like mutually assured destruction in the Cold War. Both sides have nuclear weapons. Well, that's how you assure a stable peace. It's a mutually assured destruction relationship between the citizens and their government, between the governed and their government.
Right.
That's what this is about. And so why is the United States of America still, for all of our imperfections, 250 years into this ballgame, still the place that when you open the borders, as sadly one administration has, people don't go running out, but they come running in? Why is it the country that still gives hope to the free world? One of the reasons why is the Bill of Rights. And the Second Amendment is the one amendment that gives teeth to all of the other amendments in that Bill of Rights. So that's a value judgment we make. The Second Amendment was not written with the question of what minimizes the number of deaths.
No,
those are other policies.
It was that you could arm yourself as part of a well-regulated militia, and then over time, actually, until the 80s in America, it was considered by the Supreme Court to mean just that. And then as the NRA got more political and became less apolitical, and some hardcore Republicans got onto the board of the NRA, they then put pressure on the Supreme Court, which they eventually were successful in doing, in reframing the interpretation of the Second Amendment to mean an individual right to bear arms. And what has happened,
I think the history is a lot more complicated.
But what has happened, and it may be a complete coincidence, but what has happened since that reframing of that interpretation is that the number of mass shootings in America has begun to skyrocket. And they didn't used to happen in anything like these numbers.
I think we
before.
can debate
so
the
my
data.
Question, you're a smart guy, right? There are 400 million plus guns in circulation in America. It's not for me to tell Americans how to lead their lives. It's not for me to tell you what laws you should have. You and your president, this is a major issue you're going to have to confront. I can guarantee you that every month, every 6 weeks, there will be a mass shooting of some significance that will command your response. And every month, 1 million new guns will be sold in America, adding to the total that are available. And you're going to get, as the population increases, more mentally ill people too. To me, it's just a never-ending,
So that's the part I want to work
worsening cocktail. So my question really is, what do you do about it?
Illness,
If no part of the solution involves guns, how do you ever expect it to stop?
So I think that in the data that you cited, a lot of confounding variables, one of which is the rise of mental health crises in this country. You could look at data points over certain periods where before you really saw a rise in violence, you could see per capita gun ownership being about flat over the same period that you did see violence and killings rise. One of the biggest explanations is the shuttering of psychiatric hospitals in this country. I mean, you ought to draw the lines of correlation. There are many ways to draw lines through a scatter plot. Over the same period that you saw the shuttering of psychiatric institutions, you saw almost a direct inverse correlation in the other direction in the rise of violent crime in this country. And so, yes, I do think that is a major issue that we need to address, among other things, by bringing back those mental health institutions, allowing people to, communities, to be able to, under certain conditions, involuntarily commit somebody who is psychiatrically ill and poses a demonstrable danger to their community.
But this guy that just did the latest shooting, that's exactly what happened. He was admitted to a clinic.
He should have remained committed.
He said he was hearing voices. He actually said, I'm going to do a mass shooting.
He should have remained committed.
And he was allowed to go home where he had legally
there's the
acquired
mistake.
firearms.
No, but that,
I know,
therein lies the mistake.
In that case, I think in every case, you have to look at the circumstances.
Yeah, and so if you're looking at trends, and every case is different. But I do think that
someone who loves America and loves Americans, I just see this as such an extraordinarily bizarre fault line.
Yeah.
That when, for example, Osama bin Laden attacked America on 9/11 and killed just around 3,000 people in the World Trade Center, everything changed, right? There was an absolute visceral determination by America to not let that happen again.
And we made some bad mistakes in the aftermath of that.
I agree.
The Patriot Act and everything else on down.
But I flew here, for example, from New York to see you here in Vegas, and the amount of regulations that are now involved in flying, it changed irrevocably after 9/11. And I would say, good, right? I feel safe.
And not just for the purpose of convenience, though, Piers.
No, for safety.
But it's for the purpose of, no, but I'm going the other direction. I think those were mistakes we made. The surveillance state.
Would you allow people to get on planes with guns?
I mean, the idea that the TSA is doing anything, but I mean, these checks, they're garbage. It doesn't make a difference.
Would you make it?
Doesn't make an iota of a difference. It's show. It's for show.
Are you saying you wouldn't restrict people from taking firearms on planes?
I mean, I'm just talking about a hard fact here, Piers. No, people should know this. People should know this. Literally, people are allowed to right now.
If they're allowed to.
It happens already right now. Private aviation.
They're not allowed to.
Literally of the thousands of private flights that are happening every day. It's a farce we create in the airports that's a show. It's a Potemkin village of safety.
Standards on private planes are a different issue, but on
But Piers, my whole point is it's a farce.
Commercial passenger flights, at the moment, it's illegal for people to take firearms on board a plane. Would you let them do it?
I don't think the people should be taken.
Isn't it infringement of their Second Amendment rights?
So, Piers,
is it?
The surveillance state is the real problem after 9/11.
I get it. What's the answer to my question?
I think the people should be able to check it in the cabin. That's the answer.
Really?
Check it in. Yeah, you can't access it. What's the risk?
You would allow Americans to just take, or actually anybody.
Check it in the cabin.
I could go and get my gun and just take it on board.
Not in the passenger section of the cabin, in the check-in section of the cabin.
In the hold?
Yeah, like they can't access it while they're on the plane.
Not actually in the cabin.
Check-in, not in the cabin. You know, carry on your check-in bags. But this is getting very pedestrian very quickly.
It is.
And I think the question, there's a deeper philosophical question at its core.
I'm actually more curious on a human level.
And the philosophical question
is, how do you stop all the mass shootings?
Well, first question is, who's committing the mass shootings? People who are severely psychiatrically ill. There's a stat, something 18 out of 20 of the people who have committed the last number of mass shootings.
Mainly young,
grown up in fatherless households.
Mainly young men, right?
Who grew up in unstable family environments.
And disenfranched from society.
Yes.
But
so address the underlying issues.
They're also almost invariably able to acquire very high-powered, in my estimation, I know some...
So go after the cure. Don't go after the symptomatic
I'm not
therapy.
after the...
The cure. Get to the root cause. And you started talking about it. You're right. You understand. That tells me you understand this.
No, I do understand it.
And we have to get to that root cause.
I'm not disputing any of the root causes you're putting forward, but like...
So let's have the courage to address those root causes. Because anything else is a diversion. It's going to show up somewhere else if you address the symptom.
As I said to Donald Trump, I would love a Republican politician, because in Britain, we have very few guns, and when we've had gun outrages, nobody's taken a political view right or left. They just didn't do it. Yeah. It's like we had 16...
Well, Britain's a very different country, and as somebody who...
We don't have the guns, I agree.
I'm enjoying this discussion, Piers. You say you love the United States of America. I'm glad to hear that. I just want to make sure you really know. No.
Alex Jones tried that. He failed, actually. Barack Obama saved me for the nation.
Not my style.
True story.
What is that?
Alex Jones got a petition up to have me deported.
Okay.
After my views after Sandy Hook.
Well, I believe in free speech and open debate.
Barack Obama was president. It was a White House petition. It reached the number that required a response from the president. And I was live on air when I was told Barack Obama has saved you for the American people. I'm not entirely sure the American people were massively grateful at the time, but I was grateful to the president.
Is that why you like him?
I liked you know what he said? And you'll love this. He said he was supporting...
He's a North Star of diplomacy.
He was
Maybe
upholding my rights to the First Amendment.
So if only he applied that standard even-handedly when he weaponized the IRS to go after conservatives, then I might even give him an iota of credit. But back to the question of your love of America.
Yeah.
I mean this in a, I'm not even going to caveat what I say. You've been pretty free with me, I'll be free with you.
Please do. Keep my nose out of it.
No.
Which I totally understand.
No. That's a cheap comment. Just make sure you know what you say you love, right? Because I think that there's parts of the United States of America, like the essence of who we are, not some fringe feature, the soul of the United States of America, that I think make you a little uncomfortable. I think that's the truth. I mean, the idea that anybody gets to express their opinion, no matter how heinous that opinion, the idea that you get to own a firearm for the express purpose of holding the government at bay, I think those ideas make you uncomfortable. I think those ideas make a lot of people uncomfortable.
You may be right.
I think those ideas make a lot of people uncomfortable. Yeah. And this is something that I have to then admit as an American, and I admit it and I embrace it, like a badge of honor. The American ideals, the American revolutionary ideals, they're not moderate ideals. They are radical ideals.
You know what?
They're extreme ideals.
Vivek,
that is what makes America itself.
I'll say this.
So make sure you love that. And if you do, I'm thrilled.
I love your honesty in saying that, actually. I do.
Because we got to call it out. That's what it is.
I'll give you that. And I'll also say that there are obviously things about the culture of my country which Americans find inexplicable too. Right? So I get it. It's I've been down this road many times because I take it very, I don't know, viscerally, I think, when I see these massacres. I hate seeing them, especially the school shootings.
As a human being, my visceral reaction is
it's the old Einstein
sad
thing,
one too.
In reverse, really. It's like the idea to me of total insanity is that you do nothing and nothing and nothing and nothing, expect a different result.
But you're assuming that was the purpose of the thing in the first place.
No, I'm not.
It was a very different purpose.
I totally agree.
The purpose was keeping the government at bay.
I know, but I don't think that's what's now behind all these mass shootings. I think it's a different...
But this, you're a smart guy. So I think I want to just track something you said. Your response to what happened in the aftermath of 9/11, I think you didn't get to fully completing, we went on a different strand, but to complete it, I think you were kind of painting that as a good thing. And I was pointing to the same set of facts and describing it as a bad thing.
Well, let me explain. Let me explain. I was the editor of a major national newspaper in Britain, which vehemently opposed the Iraq War. And we were the left of center newspaper that Tony Blair, the Labour Prime Minister...
Opposed the Iraq War, you mean?
Opposed the Iraq War.
You said Iran, yeah.
You
said Iran, no big deal.
No, Iraq.
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 Yeah.
Yes, get it right.
Yeah.
Opposed the Iraq War. And I'm very proud to be a part. I think it was a devastating mistake, fought on the completely false pretext of Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction.
Or having anything to do with 9/11, which they lied about.
Nothing to do with it.
They lied about it.
I think there's a different argument about Afghanistan. And I have my brother was a serving British Army officer, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, as did my brother-in-law, a lot of military in my family, served alongside Americans, right? So I have a lot of vested interest in that. America, I understood the distinction of, in that case, clearly Al-Qaeda were using Afghanistan as a place to plan terror attacks against the United States. I understood you have to go and get them. It's not dissimilar, actually, to what the argument you're seeing used by Israel now with Hamas. And it's incredibly difficult and very complicated. I don't know how you go and get terrorists who are surrounded and embedded with civilians without killing a lot of civilians. And it's a moral quagmire which I don't think anyone can satisfactorily answer, actually.
There's a different dimension of this response that I was wondering if you had a view on. I do, is the adoption of the Patriot Act, right? The restrictions on our freedoms, spying on our conversations, the idea that somehow because two people have a telephone conversation, but it's a post-9/11 era, the government can listen into that without a warrant. I reject that. I think those are mistakes. And I think you and I have a different worldview where
I think
the arbiter would be,
limitations.
if the sole question is how many lives are saved, you might come out in one place.
My response,
if the separate question is what are our founding principles of who we are in this country,
I get that.
You come out in a different place.
I get that.
And so whether it's the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, or in that case, the Fourth Amendment, I think that whether or not you and I have different views, the only thing I would say is I want more people loving the United States of America, but I'd rather at least most people know the United States of America and decide they disagree with it than to think they love it but realize that the actual thing is something different than they imagined.
Okay,
tell me. I personally think the radicalism of the American Revolution is a beautiful thing. That's how I think we're going to unite this country. But it's not going to be by pretending that those are moderate ideals, because they're not.
Okay, tell me who wrote this after January the 6th. It was a dark day for democracy. The loser of the last election refused to concede the race, claimed the election was stolen, raised hundreds of millions of dollars from loyal supporters, and is considering running for executive office again. I'm referring, of course, to Donald Trump.
I wrote those words in my book in the same juxtaposition to Stacey Abrams filling that gap.
You stand by them?
So look, I think that
you went on to say Trump delivered another tale of grievance.
Yeah,
no one likes a sore loser. One of the worst victimhood complexes of all. Said his claims about the election were weak.
So here's my point.
What he did was downright abhorrent. Do you stand by all that stuff you said about Trump and January 6th?
The reason I have a different view today is that they have been going after him. So there's a time and place to say something, okay? I tend to not say what everybody else is saying at the time. And part of the reason is what needs to be said when it's hard, not when it's easy.
But I think you were right to say it at the time. I said the same thing. I fell out with him over it at the time.
So I would have done things very differently. I would have done things dramatically differently, and I will note to you, I'm running for president in the same election as Trump.
Just to be clear.
But against the backdrop of him not being prosecuted for this, I think I take the other side of this to say that it's not criminal.
You don't think he had the election stolen, do you?
Well, I think that, to tell you the truth, were the election stolen? It was stolen in a different sense of the word. And we can go to this if you want. Big tech. Google and other search algorithms and the censorship of information.
I think that's a very interesting point.
I think that's really where the real issue is.
As I said to him when I interviewed him, I said, you're fighting the wrong stolen election claim. And he
Yeah.
said, what do you mean? I said, well, when the New York Post story exposing Hunter Biden's laptop...
I mean, that was the real issue. That would have changed the outcome.
When that was basically vaporized by big tech to protect the Bidens and Trump's
And you and I both looked at the same polls. Those would have changed the result of the election.
It could have changed. So there's evidence of a potential stolen election. So on that, I kind of agree.
Yeah, that's what I've said all along.
But that's not.
And here's the other thing I would say.
That's not the position he takes.
Well, yeah, it's fine. And we are allowed to have different positions. My position also is the 2016 election was the real election that was decisively stolen from Trump. The one that he won. For sure, decisively. Everyone agrees he won. Because he wasn't allowed to govern
Vivek,
with an impeachment inquiry.
How are you going to be, every time he gets indicted, I mean, it's quite an extraordinary situation.
And I think these politicized, if I just finish my thought,
let me finish the question.
These indictments are wrong.
Okay, but all of them?
I think all of them so far are wrong.
He's Mother Teresa?
I don't say he's Mother Teresa, but he's not a criminal.
So nearly 100 criminal charges, they're all baseless.
So the ones I've read, I mean, those are 4 indictments we're talking about, and I read each one thoroughly.
Okay.
Each one
Innocent
is using...
on all?
Each one is using a novel legal theory. So even innocent assumes that the thing that's even being alleged was a crime.
You genuinely believe he's innocent of everything he's been charged with?
I think we can talk through each one. And yes, I believe the answer is innocent because the legal fiction of the charges themselves are made up interpretations of the law that have never been used in this country.
How are you going to beat him?
By convincing voters that I have fresh legs, I am from a different generation, and we're in the middle of a war in this country, and I do believe that. We're in the middle of a war between those of us who love this country and our founding ideals.
But Trump loves the country.
And we're all on the same side of this war, right? We're all, Trump, myself, et cetera. I even think many independents and some Democrats are on the side of this war. Those of us who love this country and our founding ideals, and a fringe minority, and I do believe it's a fringe minority, who hate this country and our founding ideals. That's the real divide.
I think on the whole...
And so how am I going to beat him? How am I going to beat the rest of the Republican field? The question is, who is the right general to now lead us to victory in that war? Well, here's one of the tricks. Half the people on the other side of that war, Piers, are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We can bring them along too. Now we're talking about somebody who has not been wounded in that war. I have fresh legs. I am 38 years old, 5 years older than Thomas Jefferson was when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but less than half the age of the other people who were running, many of them. So I believe I have an ability to take our America First agenda to the next level. And honest to God, I would love Trump as an advisor, as a mentor, telling me exactly where the bodies are buried in the administrative state or otherwise, to be able to go further. He rolled that log over. We saw what crawled out.
You thought about him
I'm bringing
as your
the pesticide.
potential VP?
I've thought of him as a mentor. I don't think he would take the VP job, although I haven't asked him. I'll keep it on the list, but I think that I think it's highly unlikely that he would accept that one.
Are you tempted to run out and commit a lot of crimes to get indictments to get your poll numbers up?
I'm not going to do that.
I'm going to wrap up very soon, but just a few little quick ones.
And the truth is, though, Piers, I just think it's really important that, again, you understand this. I think you understand this. I don't mean to be preachy, but there is a difference between making a bad judgment and committing a crime. And I think it is a danger to our liberty
I'm not saying
when
he's
we
a
start
criminal.
to conflate those
By
things.
the way, I'm not saying he's a criminal.
And have you read those indictments?
It is an extraordinary state of affairs where someone can face that volume of criminal indictments,
and I think
his poll numbers keep going up. I mean, in England, that candidate would be dead and buried after the first barrage of them, right?
I think
however unfair they may be.
That's on the politics of it. I think that the reality is the opposite here is the fact that all of these indictments are coming at the same time right as he's running for office, using novel legal theories that have never been prosecuted before.
I think a lot of that has merit.
Has to do with the fact that he's running.
I think they're over-egging the souffle, as I would say, the opposition.
I think they're just determined one way or another.
Do you ever hang out with Trump?
run.
You ever talk to him?
I've talked to him a few times.
When was the last time?
It's been a while. Yeah, probably
How long?
before the first debate, easily. Yeah.
Do you think he should have debated? Is he being a bit gutless, not getting on that stage?
I think as long as he's this far ahead, I kind of get it. But I hope that we have a chance to have open discourse in this race. But, it's like you're the NBA playoffs. The team that's, number one by a stretch gets a bye. We're about to have the third debate. I'm focused on making sure that I'm the clear second before I'm confronting him in the debate.
I think you're a great energizing force in the race. I've said this to you from the very start.
I appreciate
I've interviewed you in much shorter context many times. But
we've sparred. We've had our fun.
Yeah, but I like
times.
it. And also I think you get out there and you put yourself in the lion's den, which I respect. I do respect it. And I have to say, we haven't really got into it, but all the woke madness stuff, you've been absolutely rock solid on. And I completely agree with you.
I appreciate you saying that. And the thing is, and this also about me is related to one of the other questions you were asking. I wrote the book Woke Inc. Back when it actually was a risk to write that book.
Yes, you did.
Now, the reason I share all the same beliefs, but I don't talk about it as much because, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can go criticize wokeness today, right? It's the new popular thing to do. It's almost what the cool kids are doing. Yeah. The people who are doing it today were the people who were too afraid to do it in 2020.
I think what I absolutely respect about you saw the dangers of it, and you saw that it was becoming, under the guise of liberalism, it was becoming a new form of fascism. And I think you served a valuable public service in blowing that lid up. And I feel it's beginning to turn.
I think it is too.
The majority of people are just sick and tired of it.
Well, I think this election makes a big difference in that result, just in terms of not even the laws we pass, there's some element of that, but just the tone of national character that we set in the country. Because if you think about what allows, wokeness or anything like it to fester, it's a deeper generational hunger for purpose and meaning. And I think it's been a long time since we've had a president that has revived and spoken to our national character. And that's half the job. I mean, if people grill on policies, that's just half the job. The other half of the job is, do you have an understanding of what our national character is? And then can you actually bring it back?
Well, let me ask you about your character.
And for young people, we're able to do that.
Let me ask you about your character very quickly. How rich are you?
It varies depending on the stock market. billion on a good day and, maybe 600 million on a bad day. But
US dollars.
yeah.
$1 billion on a good day.
Yeah, maybe a little more on a good day. Yeah.
Do you like being a billionaire?
I don't particularly relish the title. I am not one of these people that's been a life achievement of mine. I'm thrilled that this country allowed me to achieve everything that I have. I'm proud of my accomplishments. I don't apologize for success, but I also don't fetishize green pieces of paper. I think sometimes it's something that leads people to deep unhappiness, and I've been around a lot of them, and I'm careful to make sure I don't become one of them either. We try to live in a way that maybe would reflect a fraction of that net worth in a way that actually hopefully allows our family to avoid some of the traps that some of my wealthier friends have fallen into.
Your wife, Apurva, I think is how she pronounces it. She said your two best qualities were your joy and optimism.
Is that what she said? That's nice of her.
What do you think of that? Is that true?
Yeah, I think I'm naturally a very optimistic person. It's funny she says that because she's the person who experiences my crankiness the most at times, but there's a joy and optimism in there. On certain days, it's buried more deeply than others, shall we say.
When was the moment you knew she was the one for you?
We were hiking a mountain it was a Flat Top Mountain in Colorado. We were in Rocky Mountain National Park. And she was the one who was beating me all the way up the hiking trail. She had actually done Kilimanjaro not long before that, but we were going pretty hardcore to the top. I had been there to the top before, and I wanted to show it to her. And it was just the final maybe 300 feet, 200 feet to the top. But there was a massive snowstorm that set in. And she's somebody who's made it to the tops of these mountains before. I said I was going to go and wanted to make sure we saw that through. And she grabbed my hand and said, we're going to come back and do this sometime in the future, but we're going to have a long future together. And we turned around and we made it all the way back down that mountain.
And you knew.
And here we are, yeah.
How did you propose?
I proposed, it was actually, the real story. I mean, the cake was baked long before I proposed. I think that we wanted to get to a place where both of our families were all there. Mm-hmm. We knew what the destination was going to be. And I haven't told the story before, but she sort of said, all right, like at this point, I don't really care about the ring or anything else. If you don't get on this, you might find me proposing to you, and let's just get this over with. So I got so I was, put the perfect ring plans to one side, and we got a little ring pop, and we did it in the streets of New York City.
What?
A ring pop.
What's that?
It's like a little lollipop as a ring. It's like a big ruby.
You gave your wife a lollipop ring?
She was thrilled with it.
You're a billionaire, man. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I wasn't at the time. Was working my way up. but we got her
did you at least go on
her red ruby ring to follow, though.
Did you go on bended knee?
I did. Oh, yeah. We went through the whole thing.
You went on bended knee?
Oh, yeah, we did.
With your lollipop ring?
With the lollipop ring, yeah. It was in a nice case, though. It was a very nice case.
And what is the secret to married life?
Ooh. I think we practice, actually, is a good way to look at it. I think that if you look at every iteration as a round of practice, then that presumes that you're on the same page about the destination. You're just iterating and practicing to get to the version of perfection. And so it's never perfect, but it's about the pursuit of perfection.
And romance? Are you a romantic guy?
I maybe on a good day, yeah.
What's the most romantic thing you've ever done?
I don't know what I can't profess on my own self-romantic thing. I don't know. I feel like a little bit. I'm not a guy who's going to pat. I could think of some examples right now, but I'm not. It's not the kind of thing that I want to.
Give me a little bone.
I think
romantic bone.
I think that it was maybe one of our. I don't know how Apurva felt about it, but our Valentine's Day gift. She's a tough one to please because she's not really into stuff. She's not she has stuff. She's not particularly into stuff. But I thought about what I could do that was better than her, which are few and far between. But I gave her a tennis lesson, and we actually went through it. And she's a naturally athletic person, but we picked something up that we were then able to do together for a while.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't. It's a small thing. I don't know.
No, but actually,
there's no big ceremony around it.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
It's a nice thing.
Yeah.
And she loves it.
She seemed to like it. Yeah.
Who wins?
I mean, it's the sport I've played since growing up. She's a better volleyball player. That's what she played.
So you basically got her to play something you knew you could beat her at.
I had to pick something. I had to find something.
I mean,
she usually has me beat out.
Is that
on most
basically
things.
your character in a nutshell?
It's interesting. I'd have to do some Freudian introspection for that one. That might have been the toughest gotcha of the whole interview. The whole thing was leading to that.
Vivek, it's good to see you.
It's good seeing you, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, man.